Hello, everybody. I've got some good news. Had a COVID test yesterday, negative, but the best part about this is that the government gave me $450 to stay home that day until I got my results. That means no working, no going to the shops, but $450. That's actually more money than I would have worked if I had have actually gone to work. This is this is a good deal. It's honestly my favorite part about this whole pandemic BS is that being paid to not work is by far the greatest innovation that's ever come my way. I'll tell you that. Like it's funny to imagine that just a few years before the pandemic, 2019, universal basic income was like ooh, can't have that. What will happen? The world will go to shit. Then as soon as it happens just like that, you see like right-wing politicians like Donald Trump, like right-wing politicians here in Australia, just like completely switch up the narrative. They're like, oh yeah, okay, we could have done this all along. That's the funny part, is that they spent an entire lifetime like convincing us that like, oh yeah, you have to go to work, you have to earn money, you have to save that money into a trust, and then like wake your way up from the lower middle class to the upper middle class, and that's your meaning in life. But then, with a flick of a switch, they could just show us that it was possible this entire time. They could have just done this the entire time. They could have. What was stopping them? Nothing. Just the political will to do so. It was some guy's decision at the top who decided that like, oh yeah, like those plebeians at the bottom. Oh yeah, we'll throw them a bone. We'll throw them a bone. This could have been done the whole time, but it wasn't. We were fed this false narrative that it was necessary. It was necessary for the economy that everybody had to have a job. Everybody had to be working in these bullshit jobs, which they are, and everyone knows it. Most jobs these days, you don't even produce anything. Most jobs is just pushing like numbers around on a screen, delivering some memos from here to there. But you have to have a job. You have to be like being a productive member of society is like somehow like combined with this idea of having a job, even though like most jobs aren't even productive. Now, they call this the idea of modern monetary theory. This is the new idea that came out as soon as they turned on the money printers at the start of pandemic. That see, in the past, money used to be like it used to be pegged to a value of something, whether it was the gold standard back in before the 70s, and after the 70s they removed the money from the gold standard. But really, it was not a free floating currency. It was attached to the petrodollar, the price of petrol, because that was the commodity that everybody needed in the world. And so it wasn't a true fiat currency. A fiat currency is a currency that's not pegged to anything. You can just print as much of it as you want, and its only value is the value that is given to it by other people. But the dollar before 2020 was not a true fiat currency because it was still pegged to the price of oil, the price of petroleum. That is why around 1970s you see just America start to engage in all of these stupid bullshit oil wars, because they're trying to secure the supply of oil so they can secure their petrodollar economic system around the world. But 2020 comes, pandemic hits, price of oil falls off a cliff because no one needs that shit anymore. And what happens to keep the economy afloat? They just pump liquidity into the market. They just turn on the money printers. And how are they going to get people to like actually chase these dollars if they're fucking pointless? Because that's what they need. Like, the dollars are only useful if people want them. They need to convince people that you need this. You need to go to work. You need to like fight, scrap, fuck. You need to be fucked in the ass to receive these little pieces of colored paper. And the new theory, modern monetary theory, is that because of taxes, if we make it a legal requirement that at the end of the year you have to return a certain amount of these colored bits of paper to the government in the form of taxes. If we make it illegal to not do that, then that is how we convince people that they in fact need this stuff. And we'll see how it's going. So far they've been doing it for about 2 years, and I mean, yeah, well, I mean, jobs still exist, the economy still exists, so I guess it's doing all right. Say what you want about inflation, though, but I mean, who can say anything about that? What I think is amazing, the Great Reset, is they tell us that in the future you will own nothing and you will be happy. But the funny thing is, this is how you tell that people who write this shit have no idea what it's actually to live. Like, we already own nothing, and we're not fucking happy. Like, I mean, look the fuck around you, boomers. What do you see? Like, you don't own your car. You take out a loan for the car. It's that the bank owns that car. Like, if you drive a Tesla these days, you don't even own the Tesla. You have to take it back to you rent that Tesla from Tesla. You have to take it back to a Tesla warehouse for them to fix it up. Even if you own like a BMW, like, this is not new. Like, the only person that can fix a BMW is a BMW dealer, and they make parts specifically from BMW that you have to, that they are the only ones that are allowed to fix that. You don't own that car. You can't modify that car. That car is owned by BMW. You just pay for the right to drive that car. It's the same with mobile phones. Apple, Android, you don't own that shit. Anything that you buy, like all of these subscription services, like, there was that case a while back where some guy had like thousands and thousands of dollars worth of like iTunes music like bought, which he's an idiot. That shit's you can get that shit for free, mate. But and he wanted to leave it in a will to his son, and he couldn't, because you don't own that shit. That shit's owned by Apple. You just have the right to play that shit. And so I don't know where these these radical new idea that you will own in the future, you will own nothing. It's like we are already here, mate. But also what's a lot of people seem to not think is that that like this is literally the best it's ever been. We as normal people own more stuff now than we have ever through history, and that sounds like trite to say. I mean, like, obviously. But like, think about this. Like, back in the feudal times, right? You didn't own your land. You were forced to work on that land by the Lord. You didn't own anything. Anything that had to you was given to you at like the goodwill of whoever your landlord, whoever your king, your duke, your knight, whoever the fuck happened to be. And it was basically slavery. It's what it was. You were born on that land, and that land was traded through kings and nobles, and that land came with the people who worked and lived there, and that was the people who worked and lived there that actually created wealth for the ruling classes. This was just how feudalism worked, and excuse me. That was just how feudalism worked. It was the status quo for thousands and thousands of years of human history. It wasn't until the capitalist revolutions of the 1800s when power shifted from the landed elite, which is what they are called, to the bourgeois, the people who traded things to get money, as opposed to the people who owned the land to get money. And it was at this point when the owning of land turned to be less profitable than the actual production, the trading of things, due to just technological advancements. Your ability to make money was no longer linked to how much land you had, because you could make way more money in like a factory built in the city that employed people to work there than you could ever owning acres and acres of farmland. And obviously this only accelerated into the 20th century, where you had computers that could like create so much economic activity in such a tiny real estate sort of area. You have cyberspace where you don't even need real estate to produce value anymore. And so you see this shift away from the center of gravity, the center of power, from the landed elite to the bourgeois capitalist system. And this is sort of the economic political debate, the conflict that was being carried out around the 19th century. And I'll tell you who won. This one's been over for a long time. It was the capital. Capital won that one. It's not really fair to say capital in a sense, because what is capital? What capital is things. That's what capital is. So capital is land, because if land can be commoditied and bought and sold, it is now capital. It is a thing that exists outside of human control that can be bought and sold, and value can be created because of it. It's the same with things like factories or computers or anything. These objects, it's all capital. And the problem is not capitalism, as controversial as that may sound, because saying that the problem is capitalism is like saying that the problem is trees. We have a problem with trees. It's not that like a lack of trees can be a problem. Trees in the wrong place can be a problem, or a lack of trees in the correct place and too many trees in a different place can be a problem. But it's not trees themselves that is the problem. That's why you can't say that capital is the problem, because capital just is. Capital is stuff. And unless you want to go back to a world where there's no stuff, which I'll tell you is impossible, there has never been a world without stuff. The stuff has changed. Maybe there's more stuff now than there used to be, but to live in a world without stuff, it's absurd. It's like if caveman society, capital took the form of like pots and pottery, like spears, sharp rocks and sticks. Like that's still capital because it can still be used. It's still a thing that can be used to create value in the form of, I don't know, like dead animals that can be eaten, traded, so on and so forth. But so the problem is, it's not to say that capital is the problem. What the problem is that when we don't own the capital, this is the problem. When they say that you will own nothing and you will be happy, that is a complete paradox. It is probably actually fucking impossible. Now, the thing is that it's not capital that's the problem. It's alienation from capital that is the problem. When you don't own the shit that impacts your life, that is the problem. So if you, for example, you're a feudal farmer in the 1500s and you don't own your farm, you don't own your animals, you don't own your tools, you don't own anything, then why would you ever give a fuck to like do anything better than you currently are? Because no matter how hard you worked, then there's no reason. Because like that shit just gets taken from you anyway. Like, why would you fucking bother? It's not unless, for example, that farmer lived in a system where the farm he owned was his, where the tools he owned was his, and the profit that he got from his labor was his, that he'd actually start giving a fuck. He'd actually start having some purpose, some meaning in his life. Because that's because in the words of Marx there, it's like he has ownership over the product of his labor. And when you're alienated from that, whether it is you're a farmer working in a feudal field or you're a factory worker who doesn't own the factory that you work at, you don't own the product of your labor, it's sold to you. You work an hourly wage and that product is sold at the market at a great markup for whoever owns the factory. Or you live in the modern day and you you have a loan on a car that you don't own, the bank owns that car, and you use a driving app to drive people or food around that could just fire you any day of the week, anytime they feel like it. You don't get paid, you have to pay your own taxes, you don't get any benefits, any health insurance, any like payback for anything that happens to wear and tear on your car. It's the same bullshit. The problem is not capital. The problem is when capital is not distributed and it's not owned by the people who actually use that shit. And you could see this problem most exacerbated in housing right now. And I think this is the one that everyone wants to talk about, the fact that you will own nothing. We don't own our houses. Right now, like housing, that's some 1% bullshit. Like, I actually can't imagine what like a world would be like where like, everyone is able to afford housing. Like it's just foreign to me. That's not the world I've ever lived in. It's not the world I've grown up in. I truly don't even know. The only reason that I can know it's existed is that I can see the product of that. I can see like a generation of boomers who are obsessed with the housing price going up. And you see, this is exactly the problem here. It's like you can make the biggest like kick and scream and hullabaloo about how housing prices are too expensive and the pricing needs to come down, but there's no incentive for that to ever happen. Because if you look at the percentage of population, the percentage of homeowners in this country, it is like up to 60, 70, 80%. It's the majority of the population. Now, that's a firm minority of anyone that's actually my age or younger, millennials and Gen Z. But in terms of like the boomers who bought their $20,000 homes in the 70s when it was cheap, free real estate, and now watching the price go up, this cohort, 60, 70% of people, have absolutely no interest in that price ever coming down. And it's a no-brainer, really. And so they will like put forward policies to keep the housing price higher because it looks good on their portfolios. And it's easy. It's too easy, in fact, to hate the boomers, to hate the previous generation, because that's exactly what the system wants. It's some controlled opposition bullshit where they can point the finger and say, it's the boomers. Well, no, it's not. I mean, take a look at this shit from their perspective. You see, around their late 70s, early 80s, that's what we can say the start of neoliberalism was in this developed world here. And it came as a bargain. All of these new economic systems are always a bargain between the working classes and the powers of the elite at the time, whether that's the landed elite, or in the past, or these days, it's the capitalist bourgeois elite in the present times. And the deal back here was that they were dealing with rising inflation, rising wages that was causing the economy just to stall, sputter. And in their opinion, in the opinion of the elite at the time, it was they weren't doing so well. But it's also quite fair to say that maybe the average person was not doing so well with rising food prices, rising gas prices. And the compromise was that we are going to stop the increase of wages. You see, from the 40s to the 70s, wages would increase along the same curve as productivity. And the New Deal, the New Deal, the neoliberal deal was that your worth will no longer be linked to your wage, to how much productivity you do at work. Instead, this house that you own, that will be your new equity. That will be your new asset to pay for your retirement. What we're going to do as a system is we're going to ensure that everyone that owns a house, that's your way of buying into the system. Everyone who owns a house, that house price will continue to go up and only up until the rest of your life, until you can sell that house and retire on that money. And oh my God, what a great deal we just made. Everyone's happy. No one thought about what's going to happen 40 years later. Because, it's easy to say that, the housing price is going to go up. But, it's worth $800,000, it's worth $900,000. But, that money's useless unless you can fucking sell it to someone. It's easy to say, you can have a price tag on a house. Oh, it's worth $1 million. But you can't buy food with that. You can't buy TVs with that. Well, actually, you can. You can remortgage that shit. That's what happened in 2008, right? Everybody took the inflated value of their houses, take that to the bank, cash that in for credit they could spend on bullshit, and look how that went. It's still going great, isn't it? Really, that was the acceleration of this whole transition into modern monetary theory, where you know how they got out of that? They just printed a bunch of money. Once again, it's just bullshit, Mickey Mouse money. It's not even worth nothing. Worth so little they can give it out to people for free to not work, am I right? And it's really got to be the end of this current neoliberal deal, because what are we fucking doing here? And the logical end conclusion that you will own nothing and you will be happy, that's just so unpalatable to the vast majority of people that will be actually affected by this system. There's no way that is going to be what's put forward. You see, the thing about this system about housing as a commodity, housing as an equity that you use as your investment, is that it divorces housing from the actual purpose of what it is. The purpose of housing is to house people. But you see, in this system where housing is an equity, the purpose of housing no longer becomes to house people, it becomes to make a profit. And so if it is not profitable to use your housing to house people, then it will not be done. Instead, that's why you see there's more homeless people in the world there's more empty houses in the world than there are homeless people. But they don't want to put the homeless people in the houses because they want to keep the houses empty so their value stays high, so it looks good on a portfolio. And this is what happens. This is exactly what happens as a result of this policy that treats housing as an investment rather than a good that can be used for its intended purpose. So we've talked about how the problem isn't necessarily capital or even capitalism, the system of where things are owned by people to produce value, which at its core is what capitalism is. The problem is the alienation from owning such things that causes these paradoxes, such as the fact that housing is no longer used to actually house people. And the solution to that is radical ownership. It's taking the capital that's used into the hands of human beings. We can't let our things own us anymore. That's the system that we have now that's turned into this death trap, this death spiral, this neoliberal death spiral. Some people say that it's impossible to divorce capitalism from neoliberalism. I think that's actually untrue due to the fact that capitalism had been around for hundreds of years and neoliberalism is a new thing. Now, just like how we can't let our things own us, this is how the world has got into the current state of things, where people they are owned by their balance, they are owned by their debt. This is the debt-based economy. Like, at its logical conclusion is the whole you will own nothing sentimentality, because you don't own your land, you take out a loan for that from the bank, and then you pay that back for the rest of your life. That's not owned by you, that's owned by the bank, and therefore owned by capital. You don't own the car, that's owned by the bank, which is owned by capital. And at the greater level of things, you don't own these businesses, these CEOs, these board members, because that bank that is owned by the shareholders, who is owned by capital. And that's why you see that rather than having humans in charge of capital, we have capital here in charge of humans. And if you want to say that that's the definition of capitalism and that's the bad thing, then sure, I'll agree with you. However, I reckon that what needs to be done is to not necessarily to remove this system of capital, because, like I said, I think that's fucking impossible. What needs to be done is that this capital needs to actually be owned by the people in charge. What needs to be done is a radical shift from our current system, what we have now, where more and more things are owned by a smaller and smaller amount of people, who even at the top of the system don't own those things. It needs to be a revolution of class consciousness, just like how in the feudal system, where it was a divine right to rule, where no one even questioned that this was the right way for things to be done. This was the right way for things to happen. No one even questioned it. That was just the life they lived. It was the life they already knew, and it was what their priest told them, that this is the way that a human being, you have your lot in life, and it's the king's role to rule over you, and that was just the way it was. And it wasn't until the ideas of the Renaissance, the ideas of the Enlightenment came along, through that era of history from the 15 to 1800s, where people realized, oh, wait a second, I'm an individual human being with individual agency and control over my own destiny and my own fate. It wasn't until that this idea permeated through the consciousness of the times that we had a shift from the feudal system to the capitalist system that has prevailed since. However, a simple look around, you can see that this is far from the end state of where we are, a system where we are no longer owned by a king. We no longer ruled by divine right, but we are ruled by capital. We are ruled by things. We are ruled by our stuff. And this needs, it like existentially needs a shift in consciousness once again, a shift away from us being owned by our stuff, us being owned by our debt, the debt-based system which came about around that time, around the Renaissance. It cannot go on. Because it relies on, if you're always borrowing more money out to make the next thing happen, it relies on constant growth for you to make that money back, to pay the bank, and constant growth leads to a place where first of all, it's unsustainable because there's only so much room and resources on this planet, and unless you want to suggest that it's time to fly to the stars to exploit the rest of the resources there, you see how this is a self-perpetuating cycle. Like, there needs to be some sort of balance that comes into this system, where growth can be done on its own terms, because for the most part, growing is good, right? But it can't be a necessity, because if it becomes like what needs to happen for the survival of our human race, of our planet, then it gets to a point where short-term growth is prioritized over long-term growth, because what we need now is to keep the system rolling at all costs. And that truly does require a shift in consciousness equal to that of what happened in the Enlightenment and the Renaissance. And I'd argue at a much quicker time space than we currently have. And hopefully you can see that happening with since the pandemic, since the Great Resignation and such, where people are refusing to work these bullshit jobs for these bullshit wages from these bullshit corporations. You can see that happening there. You can see that happening with the climate, the climate movement, the green movement, saying that we are no longer just going to accept what's happening in the what's happening to the planet for the sake of profits and for the sake of capital. But it's not enough, and this just it just requires, in every sector of life, in spirituality and religion, in the finance section, in the real estate housing sector, in everything. This requires a worldwide, sector-wide revolution in how things are done, because the system at its core is rotten. And unless that, you cannot just prune branches off the tree and hope that the tree will continue to grow back healthy if the whole tree itself is rotten. What needs to be done is that at the roots need to be fixed, need to be saved. And we don't have any other option, do we? Because if we don't save this planet, if we don't save this world that we're on, we're dead. So I just hope that as many people as this reaches can keep that in mind. Like, we're not going to be able to solve this crisis with the systems of the past, with the systems of capitalism, with the systems of communism, which is really just it's the equal but opposite of capitalism in itself. The logical conclusion of communism is still you'll own nothing and you'll be happy, which I've discussed, is just unsustainable and alienating to the working class, who it supposes to help. Well, I guess I'll expand on this later, but that's all for now.